Guys, this is your girl Wakeji Kamore and welcome to Reflections by Wakeji Kamore. We are currently going through the book of 1 Samuel, chapter by chapter. It will be nice for you to listen to the end of this recording because I'll be sharing my takeouts from this chapter that we'll be reading today at the end of this recording. Also remember to subscribe and to share this with someone else, and also click the notification bell so you never miss any new recording. We're in the book of 1 Samuel. Today we're going to be reading chapter 17. And because this is a long chapter, we'll be covering it in two parts. Today I'll be reading from verse 1 to verse 23, which I will read from the NLT version and then share the lessons at the end. So kindly follow through. All right, let's read this. This is one of the most famous chapters in the book of 1 Samuel. This is a story that all of you know, but let's read it because there is learning in repetition. So let's just do that. All right, verse 17. The Philistines now mustered their army for battle and camped between Succoth in Judah and Azekah at Ephes Dammim. Saul countered by gathering his Israelites troops near the valley of Elah. So the Philistines and the Israelites faced each other on opposite hills with a valley between them. So you guys have understood the layout. The Israelites are on this side of the hill, and then the Philistines are on this side of the hill, and then there's a valley in between. Then Goliath, a Philistine champion from Gath, came out of the Philistines' ranks to face the force of Israel. He was over 9 feet tall. He wore a bronze helmet, and his bronze coat of mail weighed about 125 pounds. That's about 60 to 70 pounds. That's about 60 to 70 kilos. That's about let's even say 60 kilos. That's a lot of kilos. Like wearing a whole human being on your chest. He also wore a bronze leg armor, and he carried a bronze javelin on his shoulder. The shaft of his spear was as heavy and thick as a weaver's beam, tipped with an iron spearhead that weighed 18 pounds. Just the tip of his spear was about 7 kilos. His armor bearer walked ahead of him carrying a shield. Goliath stood and shouted a taunt across to the Israelites. "Why are you all coming out to fight?" he called. "I am the Philistine champion, but you are only the servants of Saul. Choose one man to come down here and fight me. If he kills me, then we will be your slaves, but if I kill him, you will be our slaves. I defy the armies of Israel today. Send me a man who will fight me." When Saul and the Israelites heard this, they were terrified and deeply shaken. Now David was the son of the man named Jesse that we already know, and he was an Ephraite from Bethlehem in the land of Judah. Jesse was an old man at that time, and he had 8 sons. Jesse's 3 older sons, that's Eliab, Abinadab, and Shamil, had already joined Saul's army to fight the Philistine. David was the youngest son. David's 3 older brothers stayed with Saul's army, but David went back and forth so he could help his father with the sheep in Bethlehem. For 40 days, every morning and evening, the Philistine champion strutted in front of the Israel army. For 40 days, kila asubuhi na kila jioni, kama dos. One day, Jesse said to David, "Take this basket of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread and carry them quickly to your brothers, and give these 10 carts of this cheese to their captain. So see how your brothers are getting along and bring back a report on how they are doing." David's brothers were with Saul and the Israelite army at the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines. So David left the sheep with another shepherd and set out early the next morning with the gifts as Jesse had directed him. He arrived at the camp just as the Israelite army was leaving for the battlefield with shouts and battle cries. Soon as the Israelites and the Philistine forces stood facing each other, army against army, David left his things with the keeper of supplies and hurried out to the ranks to greet his brothers. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, came out from the Philistines' rank, as he always did. Then David had him shout his usual taunt to the army of Israel. And that is that is where I will stop today. That is just basically from verse 1 to verse 23. This is my favorite and maybe the most famous story in the book of 1 Samuel. The one thing that makes David stand out from all the other Israel soldiers that were gathered at this camp was that all the other soldiers looked at this Goliath from a human standpoint. He was just like, you know what? This giant of a man seemed too big and too powerful to defeat. However, David saw Goliath from God's point of view, which is what we will see happening tomorrow. We will see David getting so upset about this guy who has decided, Kwani he has decided who he is who. As a matter of fact, you know what? Let's read up until verse 31. So this is verse 24. It says, as soon as the Israelites' army saw him being Goliath, they began to run away in fright. Have you seen the giant? The man asked. He comes out each day to defy Israel. The king has offered a huge reward to anyone who kills him. He will give the man one of his daughters for a wife, and the man's entire family will be exempted from paying taxes. David asked the soldiers standing nearby, what will a man get for killing this Philistine and ending his defiance of Israel? Who is this pagan Philistine anyway, that he is allowed to defy the armies of the living God? This is what makes the difference between David and the other soldiers. He was like, me, I'm upset that this guy, these things that he can defy the armies of the living God and leave and get away with it. And then in verse 27 it says, and these men gave David the same reply. They said, yes, this is the reward for killing him. But when David's older brother Eliab heard David talking to the men, he was angry. He was like, what are you doing around here anyway? He demanded. What about those few sheep that you're supposed to be taking care of? I know about your pride and deceit. You just want to see the battle. What have I done now? David replied. I was only asking a question. He walked over to some others and asked the same thing and received the same answer. Then David's question was reported to King Saul, and the king sent for him. So that's what I was saying, that the difference between all the other soldiers and David, that David looked at these from a God's point of view, not from a human point of view. He was angry that Goliath was getting away with blasphemy against God of Israel. Someone has to do something about this. He felt that. So David responded in faith, believing in God, that his God was greater than any false God. Because this Goliath now was starting to look like a false God, and he was like, no, my God is greater than this God. So he knew that the Lord would bring him victory. Now, when I think about the things that make me angry, things like oppression, I hate seeing God's people oppressed, to be honest, and God's people feeling oppressed and helpless. And most of the time when I see oppression happening, like, let me tell you an example. There's this documentary on Netflix about sex and work, where some women are being forced to have sex with their bosses so that they can get jobs. And that is so oppressing. And I can just imagine how helpless they feel. And my response is always, someone has to do something about this. But let me tell you, that person is never me. Me. Someone else, please, someone else do something about this. But that person is never me. My prayer for myself and for you is that God would prompt us with courage and wisdom to know what to do about the Goliaths in our lives, about the oppressions we see in our lives, about the Goliaths in our community, and how to stand up and act against the oppression of God's people. Because this is exactly what David is doing. He's like, look at the Israelites. They're oppressed because this guy over here comes every morning and evening and almost insults them and insults their God as well. So David is like, no, I'm not having this. So my prayer is that God would prompt us with courage and wisdom to know what to do about the Goliaths in our lives, the Goliaths in our community, the Goliaths in our nation, and how to stand up against oppression of God's people. That we would respond in faith and courage and never respond with fear. That every single time we are faced with something, that we will have a God's point of view, not a human point of view. So that's my prayer for us, that we will always respond in faith and in courage and not in fear. This is your girl Wakeji Kamore, and this has been Reflections by Wakeji Kamore. See you tomorrow.